Return of the Mac. Looking for a better way to get up out of bed instead of getting on the internet and checking out a new him to get up. 2022 should be a great year for the Mac. If you thought 2020 was cool with the M1 chip, and then you thought the M1 Pro and M1 Max were even cooler because they're efficient and they don't need to get so Intel hot all the time, 2022 should get you pumped. And no, it's not just because the silicon's getting faster. It's because we'll probably get more Macs next year than we've gotten in the past couple years. I'm certainly excited, and I hope you are too. Let's begin. First off, let's just go in chronological order because that's simple. The iMac Pro is supposed to be making its comeback with mini LED, 120Hz, likely a new chassis design, but it probably isn't that different from the front. I'm predicting a space gray chin with no logo, but still black bezels on this model because it's the Pro mean tool, and likely a flat back, but still rocking some more legacy I/O, such as the SD card slot, and hopefully more than 2 Thunderbolt ports like we got on the 24-inch iMac, but yeah, unbeatable desktop all-in-one that will have like incredible value. You won't be able to spec out a similarly spec'd PC with a monitor this good, and I think Apple knows that, and it will likely start out with the M1 Pro and M1 Max chip, likely 512 gigs of storage by default, but of course you can spec it far higher, and probably a little over the $2,000 starting price zone, but sure, there's a lot of people looking for this one, and if I didn't need a laptop, I would be in the market for this potentially as well, especially if there was no chin, but that's probably gonna be there. We've talked about it a lot in other videos recently, so I wanted to get that out of the way first, but we must not forget the MacBook Air, which launched with the M1 chip last year, didn't get any changes to the lineup at all in 2021, kind of makes sense, but in 2022 we should actually see a more colorful lineup, kind of blending into like the entry-level iPhones being more colorful, the iPad Air being more colorful, and yes, now the MacBook Airs too will have lots of different color options in the aluminum chassis design, and it's also rumored to be a different look, a different approach than what we've had in the past. Ditching the wedge design for a somehow even miraculously thinner design, but still with full-size function keys and potentially even a mini LED display, which kind of blows my mind. And this will be the first debut of the M2 chip, which is emphasizing better graphics over the M1, but it's still not going to be faster than the M1 Pro or M1 Max. This is still meant to be like in a fanless design first. It will probably make its way into the iPad Pros later, but MagSafe will likely find its way onto this MacBook Air as well. You'll have better graphics, better display, thinner design, more color options to choose from. It should be a very interesting entry-level MacBook, which will probably not be too affordable. Wouldn't honestly be shocked if it started around $1,100 or $1,200. Hopefully Apple's able to keep it low, but don't expect too many changes when it comes to battery life, as it sounds like with the emphasis on the Air being thin and small, the M2 chip and its improved power efficiency is likely going to be shooting for the same great battery life we already offered on the M1 Air, but now with smaller milliamp hours overall, so that they can get the design smaller. Alongside the refresh of that M2 MacBook Air, we're also expecting an entry-level MacBook Pro refresh. So yeah, the touch bar is in danger. We're pretty confident it's gonna go on its way out in 2022, but what we know shockingly little about when it comes to next year's Macs is what Apple is planning on doing for this 13-inch model, which is currently like $700 cheaper than the 14-inch MacBook Pro. Are they gonna skim down on a version of the 14-inch MacBook Pro, or are they gonna beef up the specs on that 13-inch MacBook Pro design? We don't really know much about it right now, but if I were a speculative boy, which I am, I'm gonna predict that they're going to keep that basic design that the 13-inch MacBook Pro already has, but then just slap an M2 chip in there so it's more power efficient, you got great battery life, they don't have to worry about making it too much thinner or lighter like they do with the MacBook Air, and perhaps just slap some MagSafe on there, keep the I/O mostly the same, maybe an SD card slot on the side if we're lucky, and who knows, maybe if Apple's feeling generous, they're gonna throw in mini LED 120Hz. That would certainly make it match with the rest of the MacBook Pro lineup, and if the MacBook Air is supposed to get mini LED, I don't understand why the Pro wouldn't. That doesn't really make sense to me. So there should be at least one new MacBook Pro in 2022, which is crazy considering how much new MacBook Pro stuff we already got in 2021, but of course, we're not even done there. What's probably the most exciting Mac for MKBHD next year is the Apple Silicon transition of the Mac Pro, which has been rocking this cheese grater design since 2019 and is using very, very hot, inefficient Intel chips currently, that it has to have this crazy cooling architecture, and now that it's going to be switching to ARM, I expect it to get much, much smaller, probably even more affordable. However, it's rumored to be using like several M1 Max chips combined onto a single die, and probably expect something like 4 times the performance of like a 32-core M1 Max chip. And they might not even stop there, because this is the first Mac with Apple Silicon that's going to be custom to this device. I don't think the silicon they're designing for the Mac Pro is going to find its way into an iMac or a MacBook of any kind, so they don't have to worry about power efficiency with this thing. That means they can take ARM to the max potential, consume really as much power as they want, and they'll still be able to push this thing to unparalleled levels. And you'll have by far the best integrated GPU of all time. It's gonna change the definition of what that means, because most people in the PC world would say integrated graphics is a bad thing and it's crappy and you want discrete, dedicated GPUs. But with this chip, it's probably gonna change people's perspective a little bit on what ARM is capable of. It will by far be the fastest Mac ever made, but also probably one of the fastest computers you can buy for the money. That's gonna be able to run so many freaking Chrome tabs, and it will probably start around $5,000. Hopefully they ship it with a default option higher than 256 gigs. Please, Apple, please don't pull that crap again. I would suggest the Mac Pro should start with 1 terabyte just because of how expensive it is, but we get the people saying, well, we buy it for servers, so the external storage is what matters. Ugh. Either way, we know very little about what this design is supposed to be, other than perhaps smaller, which I'm hoping means more affordable. However, the size, the I/O, none of that really matters as much, because it's going to be all about the chip, all about the performance, and pretty much that's what we should expect at the very end of 2022, because this is the beast. This is where Apple has to prove their silicon team can literally do every aspect of the market. So far, they've proven how great they can be at watch CPUs, at phone CPUs, iPad, and more recently with the M1 Pro and M1 Max, they've proven how capable they can make their chips for great battery life and great performance on laptops, but making a real professional tower that's going to be used by extremely high-end professionals. This is where Apple Silicon truly needs to shine, and I do think it's going to blow everyone's mind. So there's 4 Macs we've talked about already, and that would probably be an exciting 2022 in itself, but there's probably also going to be one more wild card, which I want to remind everyone about. Since Apple is going to be refreshing the M1 Max next year with the new MacBook Air, the new entry-level MacBook Pro, I also expect them to refresh the M1 Mac Mini, which I think should win all of the Academy Awards. All of the Oscars should go to the M1 Mac Mini for just being the absolute best value Mac you can buy, especially if you go certified refurbished. You can get that thing for like a little over $500, and the M1 chip is still insanely powerful for the everyday person. And the fact that you can buy a little Apple box that's running Mac OS and will get years of support, and have the access to the M1 chip and pair that with whatever monitor you want, that's just so insanely cool. And because there's other chips in the lineup covering the Pro class things, I do expect there to be an M2 Mac Mini of some kind next year. But honestly, I hope I'm wrong about that, because I think we all in our hearts know and love the M1 Pro and M1 Max, and we want that to come to the Mac Mini. And I actually think so many people want the M1 Pro chip in a Mac Mini that would be willing to pay for it. Apple knows this, and they realize that the margins would probably be hurt a little too much, so they would rather you shell out the money for a $2,000 plus MacBook Pro or a $2,000 plus iMac Pro to get access to those chips. I don't think it's a technical limitation preventing them from putting the M1 Pro in the Mac Mini. It's likely a market decision, because they know that would cannibalize a lot of their iMac sales. So my hope is that Apple knows that, and that's why they're going to save the M2 Mac Mini for like the end of the year, and they're not going to refresh it until we've already bought all our iMac Pros. But I think Apple knows like there's got to be tremendous demand for a desktop-oriented version of the M1 Pro and M1 Max chip. Right now, those chips are insanely good, but you can only get them in laptops, so the first debut they do of the M1 Pro and M1 Max in a desktop should probably be the iMac Pro, because people are going to spend way more money on that. The display is amazing, the value is going to be great, so it's going to sell a decent number of units just because the price is good. And then way after the transition has basically already been done, except for maybe the Mac Pro, that's when they drop an M2 or M1 Pro Mac Mini, and they're like, okay, fine, now you can have the great performance in a cheaper Mac. And a lot of people just won't buy it because they're like, oh, well, I already got an iMac Pro, so crap. Smart 4D underwater chess, Apple. I honor the game you're playing. Thankfully, I needed a laptop, so I've already fronted my money, and I don't really plan on buying any of these Macs to keep, but I'll absolutely enjoy reviewing pretty much all of them for you and telling you which ones I think are worth it, which ones are not. Either way, it should be a pretty impressive Mac year where I could frankly see a new Mac coming out at every single Apple event. Like, the iMac Pro is supposedly coming out in the spring. I wouldn't be shocked if the new Mac Pro gets unveiled at Quadruple UDC, and then I could totally see like an October or November event with the new MacBook Air, the new entry-level MacBook Pro, and perhaps a Mac Mini. Probably the iPhone event will be the only one without a Mac in it, so they might squish one in there, but really, really exciting stuff that Apple is saving the best for last when it comes to Apple Silicon. What are you most excited for? What are you going to be in the market for? Feel free to let me know down below. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you in the next one.